Hello and welcome to the Power Platform automation session on this lovely day. I have a very exciting 45 minutes planned ahead. First off, a huge thanks to all the sponsors without whom this would not be possible. Without further ado, this is Shidin here. I'm a developer slash consultant working with the Microsoft Power Platform since CRM 2011, as it used to be called back then. I'm only coming up on my 10 years in this platform, and please feel free to connect to me on any platform you can find me on. I have had very interesting and enlightening chats with fellow power enthusiasts over social media over many years, and I believe in passing it on. So that's my Twitter and LinkedIn handle. I currently work as a senior Dynamics 365 consultant for a Microsoft partner based in Ireland named Aspira. And my client is a global retail client, which is based in Sweden, a very interesting global project covering CRM, Business Central, and Azure. And that is my official email ID in case anyone wants to reach out for any follow-up queries which are not addressed in today's session. The session will be moderated by the lovely volunteer, and there is dedicated question and time towards the end. So please feel free to drop your questions in the chat window as and when they pop up. Right, so before we get started, I wanted to set the expectations right. The only prerequisites this meeting require or the session requires are the follower, which is you have some idea of what the low code, no code development is, which is what the Power Platform is all about. And you have familiarity with what is Microsoft's offering, which is the Power Platform. And you also have some familiarity with Power Automate, which is formerly known as Microsoft Flow. And since everyone knows how much Microsoft loves renaming the products, let's first align ourselves on some terminology before we get started. So first of all, there are three different kinds of Power Apps. One is the Canvas Power Apps, or what we use for the localized productivity apps. We have the model-driven Power Apps, which are more or for the enterprise apps. And we have Power Apps portals, which is Microsoft's external portal offering. And when I refer to Dataverse, or I'm actually referring to the CDS or Common Data Service, which is the underlying common data model on which all the apps are built. And when I refer to Dynamics 365 or CRM or customer engagement, I'm essentially just saying that's a Dataverse plus a few specialized first-party applications which were developed from Microsoft's end. Great. Now, these are the main topics I would touch upon today. The first one would be Power Automate flows. Then I would be talking about classic workflows, which are mostly used within Dataverse or Dynamics 365 customer engagement. And then I would move on to actions, which are reusable workflow components, which can be used. And then I would be touching upon plugins, which are not really a low code approach. And then I'll be talking about business rules. And lastly, about business process flows. Okay, so Power Automate flows. These are very aptly the poster child of Power Platform automation. And I will not be spending too much time on this as I see there are some great sessions for the same already. But a brief summary, as you know, this is one of the core pillars of the Power Platform. And it is available as a separate product in itself. And the last time I checked, there's over 470 plus pre-built connectors, which means you could connect to 470 plus other services out there without having to write even one line of code. And the designer is easy and straightforward. And with the recent updates, there is capabilities for robotic process automation or intelligent automation as well. So let me just quickly jump into my demo. So I have an environment spun up for my Scottish Summit. That's my solution name. And I have quite a few processes set up here. So let me go to my flow. As you can see, I have a flow which is set up known as send notification to case owner on case creation. So my business scenario is this. I have cases or incidents which I would be creating from the interface. And every time this happens, I will be triggering off some automation which happens. So this is during demo. So I'm just going to trigger off one, and I'm saying the customer in this case, let's just pick up somebody, and I'm going to save this. So what happens is I have a flow already created, this one, and what it does is every time when I create a record for incident, which is the table's name, what it does is it gets the email ID of the case owner and it pushes out a notification using the Power Apps mobile app. Additionally, It also does one more thing. It posts a message to the user on Teams. So I have my Teams open here. And as I can see here, I just get a new message saying a new case has been assigned. So as you can see, this is very easily done through Power Automate. I had some event which happened in Dynamics 365, and using Power Automate and literally 5 drag and drop steps, I was able to integrate it with an external system such as Flow. And as I said, there are 470 different applications or connectors I could be connecting to. Right. Jumping to classic workflow. So long before Power Automate was even an idea or a concept, what we had to work with was workflows. Now, these provided automation options with a graphical user interface as well, and they've been around since 2007. But the main difference here is the workflows were only capable of doing operations within the scope of Dynamics 365. So they could not send a message to Teams or any external third-party systems. But Microsoft did provide us the SDK, which is a software development kit. And with a developer who could write a few hundred lines of code, we could achieve the same thing. But again, that would not be a low code approach. And one thing to mention is similar to the trigger of a Power Automate flow, a workflow is tied to a single entity or table, which we define when the workflow is being created. So the workflow will only trigger for that particular table and for nothing else. And workflows again have the ability we could make them real time, which is synchronous, or we could always mark them to be asynchronous. So let me jump into a demo on workflows. So just going back to my solution, I have a process, and processes are where you would find it. So if you click on add a new process, that would take you to the stream one. So I do have a process already set up, and this is my workflow. So what I'm doing here is I'm saying I need to update my customer's GDPR preference. And as you can see from here, it shows the entity or the table this is linked to. So it says it's linked to the case, and the category is a workflow. And these options essentially tell me how I should be running it, whether I should be running it in the background as an asynchronous one, or it should be a real-time workflow. So this is a real-time workflow, and this is the scope, and these are my triggers. So I'm effectively saying when this change GDPR preference field on a case changes, I want to trigger this flow. So for the flow to work, I need to activate it. And once it's activated, what it does is, if you notice, I do have a change GDPR preference on the case. So what I'm providing here is once a case is being created, I am giving the user the option, or the customer also said they want to change their GDPR preference. If I say the customer wants to change his preference, and now he wants to opt out from GDPR, if I save this record, the workflow works in the back end and it goes and updates this on the contact record. So if I open up the contact record, I should be able to see that the GDPR opt-out has now changed to yes. So effectively, it just keeps the workflow I created, just make sure that this is always in sync. So, and again, now if this was a background workflow, I also get to see what are my process sessions, and I also have logs to keep. So in case there are, in case the workflow encountered some errors, I would always be able to go to my process session and see what went wrong and how. Okay, so that's what we call the classic workflows. The next one is actions. So this again is kind of like the evolution of workflows. Now workflows were powerful, but they had many limitations, one of which was we needed to recreate the same series of steps in multiple workflows needed to perform it. So there was also a concept of child workflow, which helped us to an extent. But then Microsoft introduced the concept of actions in 2013. So in short, an action can be thought of as a message like create, retrieve, update, or delete. So when we create an action, let's say called send invoice, Microsoft creates a message named send invoice in the backend, which can then be called by any workflow code inside the system, external systems, Power Automate, our JavaScript file. And again, like workflows, actions are tied to a single table. But there is an exception to this rule. You could have an action which is not tied to any table. We call such ones global actions. And in actions, we can pass input parameters into the action, again from a defined set, and we can always expect output parameters in return as well. So let me show how actions work. Again, in my solution, I have an action which is known as the sales insights GDPR opt-out contact. So what this action does, as you can see, it's activated. What now this is the unique name through which I can trigger it from Power Automate or any of my external systems. And I'm saying this is actually tied to the contact entity as an action. And it has the enable rollback, which means if there are 5 steps which need to be done, if the 4th step fails, this checkbox ensures that all the previous 4 operations are rolled back as well. So effectively in my action here, I am accepting an input parameter, which is of type Boolean, and this is a required parameter. So you cannot call the action without this. And once I get this, I'm performing some steps saying if this parameter is true, then I'm going to update the contact to true. And if this parameter is false, then I'm going to update the parameter to false. And the interface is exactly the same as we saw with the workflow. The only difference is the beginning bit. So if you see here, this is where on the contact record, I am updating the GDPR opt-out. Now, as I said, an action in itself does not have a trigger point or a trigger mechanism. We would need to consume it in a workflow. So I do have a workflow, a rewrite of the previous one which I created, and it's got the exact same triggers, but the only difference I am doing here is my previous workflow, as you can see, it was defining and it was doing all the checks itself and it was updating the customer. But while using an action, all I'm doing is one check and I'm saying, hey, invoke this action because the action now contains all the logic which is necessary for my logic to work. So even with this, let's say I go back to my case, right? And let me just refresh this. As you can see here, the contact's GDPR is set to yes. So let me change it again. And I say he wants to opt out. And as you can see, it still works as expected. So this is just one case where my workflow is actually leveraging an action. And that way now tomorrow, if I have to build a separate process or a workflow, which does the same logic, all I have to do is invoke the same action. I don't have to copy paste or rewrite the steps again. Now, the next one, plugin. So one thing about workflows and actions is that we could extend it than what was possible using the drag and drop editor as well, using the software development kit. But Microsoft also made the way possible that without this interface, you could totally start from a code first approach. And so we write the code as a class library in .NET code, and we deploy them to the server or the cloud using a tool from Microsoft known as the plugin registration tool. And how it works is so you essentially have what we call a plugin assembly, and you would have multiple plugins created under it. And for each plugin, you create an event or a step. Right now, plugins can do way more complex, advanced stuff. So in case a record changes, a plugin can actually know what was the value before the update happened and compare it against the new value. Now, this is not possible using the workflows or Power Automate because they only work with what is the updated value. There is no way for us to know what was the value before the update. So plugins offer all those advanced capabilities. And again, there is something known as a pipeline execution. So we could say the plugin should execute before the record is saved, or maybe after the record is saved. And again, it could be a synchronous process or an asynchronous process. And unlike Power Automate Flow, where the trigger was just create, create, update, delete, plugins could take specialized operations. So we have specialized operations known as opportunity win, lead qualify, opportunity closeout. There are hundreds of such specialized operations. The plugins can actually latch onto those events and trigger the custom code. Now I would show you how the plugin registration tool looks like. I have it open here against my environment. So as you can see, I have an assembly known as Microsoft Dynamics Field Service. I have a plugin known as the Field Service plugin. So when I expand this plugin, I see there are multiple steps. So let me just go and register a new step. So what I'm saying is here, okay, every time a create of incident, that is the name for a case. When I create an incident, I want whatever is the logic in this plugin to trigger. And again, there are additional parameters I could give. I could say this could run in my context. It could run in a separate service accounts context. I could say in case there are multiple steps on the same create of case, I could say, okay, maybe this is not the first one. This should be the last one to go. And this is the pipeline execution stage. I said, I'm saying if I say pre, it means it happens before the case is created. If I say post, it happens after the case is created. And I could choose to have it in synchronous or asynchronous mode. And I can always pass secure and unsecure configurations to this. So as you can see, there are way more advanced capabilities which we can do, and we define what is our trigger for this. But the code logic and everything is unfortunately buried inside the code, which is written in .NET and deployed to this. So this is not really a low code method. It is more for, it's a developer step or an action which needs to do, which are plugins. But usually we revert to plugins when workflows and the other out of the box automation low code ones do not serve the purpose. And now moving on to something even easier is business rules. Now business rules are a simple front end validation and logic. By that, I mean, when we have model driven forms and I need to hide and show stuff on the form, instead of writing JavaScript, I could just use business rules. Now this could do a variety of operations such as show or hide values. It can clear out values. It can do simple manipulation. It can grab two fields, sum it up to the third one. It can show error messages, and all this is possible using business rules. Now, a business rules is more of a model driven app concept, but it is also applicable in Canvas apps. But the idea is it should have some relevance in the Canvas app. In case I have a business rule which says show or hide field on Canvas app, it doesn't make sense because that's only a model driven concept. But in case I have a business rule which sets the value of a field based on some other operations, then this will work as expected in the Canvas app as well. And all this is driven by a setting known as the scope, which I would show in a minute. And business rules are really ideal when you have all those fast changing rules, especially one simple scenario is the credit card scenario where I say, if a customer locks more than 400 euros or 500 USD, I need to change his level to something else. So business rules provide an easy way for the functional consultants to change it, as it's again, it's an easy drag and drop editor. So business rules. So the way to navigate to business rules is a bit different. At first, you need to go to the table or the entity you're dealing with. So in this case, I am dealing with the case entity. And once the editor opens, there is a tab at the top for business rules. As you can see, I have one business rule set up here. And if I go to my business rule, right, it is actually showing or hiding my GDPR preference field. So the condition as I define here is it says, if this field value is yes, then I'm saying show me this field where the visibility is set to yes. If not, hide this field. So how it renders on the form is based on this toggle field, I am showing and hiding this field. That is how it renders. And as you can see, this is just easy to do. It's just a drag and drop one. And the scope is all forms. So I'm saying irrespective of if I have multiple forms, the same logic would apply across all the forms. Now, again, you could have multiple branching logic. You could make your business rule as complicated as the designer allows you to. And let me just show you what are the other operations which are possible. So if I deactivate, as you can see, that's the conditions. And as you can see, I can add a recommendation. I could lock or unlock fields. I could show an error message against a field. I could set the field value. I could set a default field value. Now I could also set a business required level. I could make it required or not required. And then I have the set visibility, which is what I have leveraged here. So that is business rules. And the last one is a bit different. This is what we call business process flows. Now, business process flows, they are not they do not provide automation itself, but there's a more of a way to bring everything together. They provide a kind of a multi-stage process for a user to interact with the record. So you would have, as you can see from the screenshot, I have the identify stage, and it has different steps in it, and then it can go to the next step. So this is especially useful when we have users working with forms that have lots of fields. And at the first stage, you don't need to fill in all the fields. So this kind of helps with that data entry and provides that seamless experience. But at the same time, it's more than just a seamless data entry experience. When I go from one stage to the next, I could have conditional logic. Maybe I need, as in this case, as I can see here, if this case requires approval, I could route it to a different stage altogether. And a business process flow is capable of calling other automation elements such as workflows, actions, or even Power Automate flows into a stage. So let's see how that happens. So again, back in my solution, I have processes and I have my phone to case process. That's the name of my business process flow. So if I go to the record, you would identify it. I have 3 steps: identify, research, resolve. And as you can see, I can keep moving from each stage to next. So this is defined here: identify, research, and resolve. So maybe in the research stage, I need to add, maybe I can add, sorry, I could add data steps, which essentially means that I'm just going to add one more field. So maybe I need to do the existing one. Or I could actually say, you know what, call a workflow. When I get into the stage, I want to trigger this workflow when it enters the stage. And the workflow I am going to trigger is my update customer GDPR preference. So the minute the record gets into the stage, this automation is fired. And as you can see, I could also call action steps if I have them, or I could even call flow steps. If I have flow steps, I'm not sure if I have any flow set up, but I could again trigger them from the business process flow. And this would render on the record as and when it happens. So again, a business process flow is created when the record is automatically created, and it stays with the record till this particular record is deleted. And Microsoft in the back end, it automatically tracks the amount of time a record spends in each stage. So as you can see, this entire process is now active for 17 minutes. It's been in the research stage for 1 minute. And I could always go back to the previous stage. Now, because I went back, it says it's been less than 1 minute. So Microsoft in the backend is tracking all this, how much time did the record spend in each. So this would really help us with a report later on and so forth. And again, as I said, this provides a seamless experience for the user. So they only have to provide the information they require at every stage and not worry about everything else. Right. So how it all comes together, right? This is my take on it. So when somebody says, hey, look, I need this to work automatically, right? What are the questions we should be considering before we jump to a particular option? So the first one, let's say, the first question we need to ask is, hey, is this a simple form or some data validations? If it is the case, then business rules are the way to go. Business rules, again, you need to define the scope, but they are capable of performing simple form validations and data validations. And remember, this is only for model driven apps. In case what we are looking for is not data validations or form validations, and the automation actually needs to connect to an external service. It could be anything. It could be Teams, SharePoint, Twitter, LinkedIn, whatever it is. Then Power Automate is what you need, because this is where we leverage those 470 plus connectors without having to write code. It's just, this is where Power Automate really shines in case you want to connect to multiple systems in the easiest way possible. Now, if the scenario is you don't need to connect to external services and all your operations are confined to Dynamics 365 or Dataverse, right? The next question you should be asking is, okay, does this process need to be real time? An example of this is when I create a case, I want to send an email to the case owner. Now, this doesn't have to be a real time process. It could be achieved in the next few minutes, in the next 15 minutes, it's not critical. But sometimes there are processes which you need it to be done right then and there. So Is this one of those critical real-time processes which had to be synchronous? If the answer is no, again, Power Automate is the tool to option, and that's the recommendation from Microsoft. But again, even if it's not a real-time process, you could achieve it with a workflow as well as with plugins as well. It really comes down to personal choice as well as what is capable. There could be scenarios which are not possible in workflows, which is what the next decision is about. Whether we need advanced capabilities, as I said in the plugins, we kind of get to know what was my previous value. I need to compare it against something. Maybe I need to execute it at a specific pipeline execution stage. If you need all those advanced capabilities, if you don't need all those advanced capabilities, then workflows is the way to go. But in case you do need those advanced capabilities, plugins are the way to go. And at the very bottom, I just have a scale of what is the low code, no code one. So if you're using business rules, Power Automate workflows, they are on the low code, no code spectrum. But if you're going to plugins, they are definitely on the code spectrum, which requires way more knowledge or way more experience. And if you notice, actions are not on this because, as I said, actions in itself, they are not capable of any automation. They always have to be coupled with Power Automate or workflows or plugins. And business process flows are completely off the chart because, again, they don't do automation in themselves. They are just a seamless way for users to interact with the data. Right. That brings us to our Q&As. So please feel free to get your keyboard skills up and type your questions away. We have a good 15 minutes to address all the questions before your next session. All right, that brings us to the end, and the slide and the video recordings would be shared. And if you have any feedback, queries, follow-up queries, always please feel free to reach out to me. And thank you so much for your time. Enjoy the rest of the summit. Have a lovely day, everyone.